Hello, and welcome to the 27th episode of Join Us at the Table. My name is Caitlyn Barber, and today we have Audrey Spence joining us from the Good Food Institute. To start off, we're going to dive into Audrey's role at the Good Food Institute being a startup innovation lead, and then we're going to share a little bit more about the Good Food Institute, also known as GFI. The Good Food Institute is a nonprofit working to make the global food system better for the planet, people, and animals through focusing on making plant-based food accessible, affordable, and delicious as well. Thank you so much, Audrey, for being here today. We're really happy to have you on.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, so to kick off the questions, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you went to college, how you began your career, and maybe the opportunity that led you to working at the Good Food Institute.
Yeah, so I think it's maybe best to start fairly early with this question because I grew up in a very small rural farming community in upstate New York. So my neighbors had a herd of cattle. They also had about 70 goats that they would milk, and they had a dairy farm. And so I would say I was interested in animals and agriculture from a pretty early age, actually. I was involved in things like 4-H, which is something probably a lot of rural folks know about, maybe not people who grew up in cities, but that's a big youth development organization. The USDA runs it. And I was very involved with all these animal kind of groups within 4-H. I was working on farms. My parents had an organic vegetable garden. And so I feel like I always knew, maybe more than other people, where our food was coming from and was really interested in that. And so that brought me, when I went to college, I should probably say that I was also one of those, horse crazy girls who rode horses all the time. And I really thought that I was going to be a veterinarian and I was going to be a large animal vet and just work with horses all day. And so I went to Cornell University, started studying animal sciences there in their College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. Cornell has one of the best vet schools in the country. And I really thought, great, I'm going to study animal sciences. All of the veterinary professors will get to know me. I'll just straight shot to vet school. My life is figured out. But that didn't really go as planned. I got to college, the world opened up for me, and I started thinking about a lot of other things that I could do. I began double majoring. So I double majored in development sociology. That's really looking at rural communities. And I think I was one French credit shy of a minor in international agriculture and rural development. So I kind of lifted my head up from this pretty narrow focus on veterinary medicine to really start thinking more about, the role of agriculture and the role of agriculture in our world that's changing pretty rapidly.
Yeah.
Something I think is really interesting is, farmers used to be maybe 1 or 2% of the working, or they are 1 or 2% of the working population right now. That used to be like 70% of the American workforce.
Mm.
So this has had like really big implications for how we live, where we live, and what we eat.
Mhm.
And I feel like that what we eat really started kind of coming to me in a bigger way. So I think the environmental impact of farming was still being explored a little bit, and it was a little bit newer. Now I think you read about it so much more.
Mhm.
But at the time, the report, I believe it was Livestock's Long Shadow, the FAO, released that report, and the authors came and spoke about it in one of my classes. And it was very controversial because it was showing just how much greenhouse gas emissions that animal ag was contributing and the pretty dire impact it was having on the climate. And so that's all to say that I think what I was doing in college really started laying the seeds
Mm.
for what I'm now doing. But to make this story hopefully not too much longer, after college, I started working on a CSA farm. So that's community supported agriculture. Got really into food and cooking because I was growing all these vegetables, toiling away in the fields. I was managing a farm to table restaurant.
Oh, wow.
And that's just seeing food from a little bit of a different perspective, from that kind of consumer eater perspective.
Mm.
And then I moved to New York City and I started a master's degree in food systems at NYU. But again, my life took a little bit of a different path. So when I was in New York, I kind of diverted paths pretty definitively. So I started working in philanthropy and I started raising really millions of dollars for some transformational organizations in both higher education and then also in financial empowerment. And I
Wow.
did that for many years. It took me to San Francisco, which is where I live now. And I would say, man, probably about 5 years ago, I was just like, something's missing, something's not right. I'm doing impactful work, but it's just not what I really care about. I'm really passionate about food. I need to do something in food.
Yeah.
And I started consulting on the side. So I was working with startups and in the ag space, like helping them with their pitches, raising VC capital, helping them tell their stories.
Mm.
And in that, I started hearing more about alternative proteins. And this was when Impossible was just launching their burger. It was limited releases in some of these restaurants around the Bay Area. And everyone was talking about the burger that bleeds. And I thought it was just the coolest thing. And
Mm.
I found GFI during this time. And I just remember this kind of full body like sensation reading GFI's website, like, oh my gosh, yes, I need to work here. And thankfully, I didn't have a background in all proteins. All proteins didn't exist when I was in
Yeah.
college. And I was still in philanthropy, and kind of the great thing there was that GFI is a nonprofit. So we're funded entirely by donations. Our donors really, really care about the work that they do, and they fund everything. And so I got a role in the development team, started raising money for GFI, working with some of our incredible donors. And then after really being embedded in the all protein space, I made the switch to a different team to doing what I'm doing now. So that was a pretty thorough answer, I think, to your question.
Wow, no, that was incredible. Very interesting background and how you started off, obviously living next to farms and how that's like shaped your career now. It's very interesting. I'd actually love to learn more about your farm to table restaurant experience. Were they serving like vegan meals then, or was it more just the farm to table experience?
It was more the farm to table experience. This was in Ithaca, New York, which is where Cornell is, and there's really an amazing local food ecosystem there.
Mhm.
So they had great connections with many of the farms in the area. It was fun because I was also working on some of those farms. So I really felt like I got to see it from, I helped pick that strawberry to the strawberries now in this dessert we're serving. And it gave me a lot of respect for folks who work in the food service industry. It's honestly, that was probably one of my most challenging jobs. You're dealing with a lot of personalities and people in those roles.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. And now, what are some of your day-to-day responsibilities, or what would your a day in a life look like for you?
Yeah, so I think I have a really, really cool job. I know I'm biased, but how cool. I just get to support startups, support entrepreneurs, just across the all protein ecosystem. So I'm based in the US. A lot of the folks I work with are in the US, but we really have a global mandate. So I guess before I dive into this question, I'd love to share just maybe a little bit of background about like the broader work that GFI does. Yeah, so I would just say, we're I'm one person on about a 200 person team. We're global. So I'm of course in the US, but I have team members in Europe and Brazil and India and Singapore and Israel,
Mm.
and all of us are working towards food system transformation. I'm on our corporate engagement team. So we're engaging with all kinds of folks across the industry, the food industry, not just all protein. So we're talking to investors, we're talking to retailers, we're talking to some of these really, really big food and beverage companies about the opportunities. We also have a policy team that are mostly based in DC. They're really working to get more money into this industry, more government support. And then our SciTech team is focused on building up this research, building up the academic ecosystem. And so we're all kind of working separately, but in tandem towards the same thing. And on the corporate engagement team, my specific role or mandate is again startups and entrepreneurs. And I just took a peek at my calendar just to kind of give you a sense of the things I'm doing. But I would say a lot of it's interacting with a range of stakeholders across the industry.
Okay.
I'm meeting with founders, I'm hearing about their businesses, I'm giving them feedback, connecting them with GFI resources, chatting with aspiring entrepreneurs, really trying to provide maybe just some pressure testing of their ideas. Meet with conference organizers, for example, this morning, just to chat about the agenda, identify speakers, brainstorm a workshop. I'll be chatting with a journalist tomorrow about some of the ecosystem to help frame a story that they're writing. And then I also get to talk to a lot of experts because we're trying to bring in all of these people have amazing knowledge that can be applied to alt proteins. So how do we get them to come? I host a webinar series. So we really try to get these amazing, bright people to share their work with folks who can benefit from it. So that just gives you a little sense of, the types of conversations that I've been having just this week alone.
Wow, yeah, that sounds so interesting. And I was wondering kind of what led to, you said you were on the alternative proteins and now you're on the corporate engagement team, if there was an experience or passion that led you to make that switch necessarily?
I fundraising and philanthropy was amazing. I got to work with some wonderful people.
Hmm.
I kind of wanted to just switch focus a little bit and be in more of a support role, if you will, where I'm providing more to folks. And I'm in San Francisco. We're surrounded by
Right.
innovation. We're surrounded by entrepreneurs, investors. And so I think I was really captivated by that energy, and it felt like such a natural next step to apply that skill set and what I've been doing to sort of a different audience area, if you will.
That sort of actually gets into my next question about how your interactions with entrepreneurs, and it seems like a lot of that happens in the Bay Area, obviously. But kind of when engaging with those entrepreneurs in the food innovation space, what attributes you look for in these startups?
Yeah, so what I should say about this is that, as a nonprofit, GFI is really here to support the entire industry. So
Mm,
we're not necessarily picking winners or favorites. That's
mhm,
not our role. We want to really lift all boats and provide all of our resources equitably.
mhm.
That being said, things that get me, excited
Wow.
are some of these big white space opportunities. So, are you doing something new and different that hasn't been done before? Do you have technical innovation behind what you're doing? Is it really defensible? If you're just doing what everyone else is doing, that's great. I hope you're successful, but it might not be
Mhm,
as interesting.
mhm,
Uh, and then, folks that are passionate always stand out. And on that front, I was just, I'm kind of reflecting on the founders that I enjoy talking with the most or that I see going the farthest.
mm,
And one thing I would say about being a founder, it's really hard. And what I think a lot of people don't really know is that if you're a founder, you're basically a salesperson. You're
right.
selling everyone always. You're selling your company to investors. You're also selling it to employees. You
Mm,
really have to build a team. That's one of the most important jobs of a founder is to build a really strong team. You need to sell them that vision. And you
mm,
also need to sell to customers. And so there are certain folks that I leave calls more energized after the call than before the call. And whenever that happens, I'm like, I think this person's gonna go far and do well because they're able to get people motivated around what they're building. And you can't do it alone. You need to have a lot of support around you. And so just on a personal level, that's always something that I notice in entrepreneurs that I speak with.
wow. Yeah, that's definitely interesting to see like how that plays out in the Bay Area, and obviously supporting all areas of food innovation is so important because there's so many different innovations happening now compared to it seems like 10 years ago, how rapidly the space is changing. I was wondering how you support those startups in your role at the Good Food Institute.
So I think a big part of how I support them is ensuring that they are connected to GFI and know the right resources and items to tap into. We're constantly adding new offerings, we're releasing new reports, and a lot of people don't know about that. So it's trying to understand what it is that they're working on, what are their pain points, and are there existing things that they can utilize. A great example of this is we launched a mentor program last year. So we now have over 30 really, really amazing mentors who
Oh,
are
wow.
experts, and you can just apply to have a like not even apply, you submit a brief form and you can talk to as many of these experts as you want about your specific problems. And a lot of people just don't know we have that. And so much of what I'm doing is trying to get the word out about that. We're releasing new reports. We have maybe 5 people on our team, and they're just doing research and analysis.
Mm,
And we're writing this down, we're releasing it so I can guide them in the right direction. I host a lot of events, really trying to bring people together. I think there's so much magic that can happen when folks connect and, share their challenges and share opportunities. So I really view myself as someone who's trying to keep a pulse on the industry, and also someone who's trying to connect the industry.
mm. Yeah, it's great to see how you support those companies that especially are just starting out and obviously I'm sure dealing with tackling many challenges. Kind of my next question that I had for you was, what are some of the trends that you've noticed in the entrepreneurial space of alternative proteins or food innovation or food transformation as a whole?
Such a fun question around trends that we're seeing. It's funny, there's food is food is something that is comforting to people. We have such ingrained patterns around food. We all have so many memories around food. There's such a cultural connotation to what we eat. We're eating this at Christmas because our grandma made it for us. And so that's why food innovation is so interesting, because there's this, technical side to food innovation and really developing these products in the right way, making them tasty and making them cost less, or cost an appropriate amount.
Mm,
And there's also this sense of wanting it to be novel, but also familiar enough so people want to buy it.
mhm,
And I think that's such an interesting kind of challenge for these new alternative protein products, because they are novel, but they're also familiar.
mm,
That being said, I was just kind of reflecting on that. That being said, I think that there's been a big focus on, making products that taste really good, that don't cost a lot of money. And I think we'll probably see folks focus a bit more on health and health attributes, things like micronutrients or the fiber content of plant-based products, which are really promising and healthy. And I think we'll see that kind of emerging a bit more in marketing over the next year.
mhm,
I think we'll probably see more ingredients made via precision fermentation. And so precision fermentation, I find it so cool and fascinating. It's you're basically harnessing microbes and using them as these little cell factories to make a protein or a molecule. And so we've been doing this for a really long time. Most insulin that we use is actually made via precision fermentation. We used to have to get insulin from the pancreas, I believe it's the pancreas of like millions of pigs,
mhm,
and which just feels crazy. Now we just program microbes to produce insulin. And so you can do that to produce proteins found in eggs, proteins found in milk, all kinds of animal proteins. And I think we'll see those being incorporated into products in a bigger way as these companies scale up. And so it's basically an identical protein, as to one that you would find in, say, milk from a cow,
mhm.
but a cow is never used to make it, which I just think is fascinating. And so I think we'll see those hit the shelves in a bigger way. Uh, Cultivated meat was just approved. So I do believe that we will have greater consumer knowledge of cultivated meat. It won't really be widely available for a while,
Mhm.
just because these companies need to scale up. Right now, I think it's just being sold in DC and SF and just one or two restaurants. But getting that FDA USD approval was a huge milestone. And I think finally folks, not just in food, but just more broadly, are hearing about it and have heard about it, which I think is pretty cool.
Wow, that's super cool to learn more about that process. It sounds so transformational in making meat sustainable for people to eat, like through the cultivated meat that you said. And I also think it's so true that consumers are definitely looking for that for the health like reason behind grocery shopping. I'm not sure if you've watched the Netflix shows, either like the Blue Zoom show or the You Are What You Eat, like comparing the vegan diet to the omnivore diet. I recently watched those shows, and I'm sure millions of other Americans have too. And it's so interesting to see or have that information so accessible now to consumers and to learn more about where your food is coming from and also what's maybe a healthier option to what is on the grocery shelves. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that or kind of where that you see that going in the next few years.
Absolutely. I love the Blue Zones book. I read it a few years ago, and it's on the docket to watch both of those soon, to dig in more. I think what we're seeing is obviously, as I mentioned before, things need to taste good, and they also need to cost the same or less as their animal-based counterparts. That's just kind of table stakes. What we're also seeing is that for many consumers, health is that switching motivator. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we have a lot of habits when it comes to what we eat. I don't know about you, but I started buying certain brands 10 years ago, and that's still what's in my fridge today. It just makes it easier in the grocery store. So
Right.
to get someone to switch what they're doing and take a chance on a new product, you kind of need a reason, and health is certainly one of those reasons. Folks want and are looking for some of those healthier options that also taste really, really good. And I don't blame them at all for wanting to think about that and being focused on that.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I think, like, and you mentioned earlier, the fiber intake as well. I think that's something that people will probably focus on as well. I'd love to learn a little bit more about some of the research that you've done. I recently read your article, The Novel Ingredients, the Expanding Toolkit of Crops Shaping the Future of Food. And one quote that really stuck out to me was that there are more than 50,000 edible plants in the world, but just 15 of them account for around 90% of the world's food energy intake, which is a pretty crazy statistic. And I was wondering if you could kind of expand more on that or kind of what sparked your interest in researching plant consumption.
I'm so glad you brought this up because one, I had such a fun time researching and then writing that article. And also, that's a shocking statistic. I found that out and I was really just blown away. And I shared it with a bunch of my team members because it is just a really interesting look at how our food system has become really concentrated. There's a huge amount of concentration in food and ag. And, to back up a little bit, just reflecting on my family and their vegetable garden that they had.
Yeah.
Dad is actually a part of Seed Savers. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's a nonprofit and they preserve all these heirloom seeds. And
Okay.
there's like 20,000 different varieties of seeds that would otherwise just go extinct or be lost. And I don't know, if you think about like going and getting an apple at the store, there's a lot of apples, but still there's only, maybe like 5 apples.
Mm.
Red Delicious, you have a Granny Smith, you have a Gala apple. It's kind of constrained. And there used to be thousands more apple varieties. And if
Mm.
you think about other vegetables, there also used to be so many more varieties of those vegetables.
Yeah.
We've lost a lot of that as we've industrialized. And, my dad was so proud over Thanksgiving because there was this blight impacting all of these all of these tomatoes in upstate New York, and he doesn't want to use pesticides. He's,
Mm.
all organic with everything we do. And he was really smart and actually found this heirloom variety of tomato, got it from the Seed Saver catalog, came from Mexico, and it was just naturally resilient to this fungus.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that so cool? And so he like feels like I outsmarted it. And it's just like there's so much genetic diversity
Yeah.
out there if we find it and protect it. And it kind of just scares me to think about a future where this might not exist and thinking about all proteins and just recreating or shifting our food system to a better direction. How can we tap into and use those diverse sources is something I'm really passionate about. And I think it's just a really amazing opportunity.
Yeah. No, it's definitely it was a crazy statistic that when I read it just completely shocked me. And I love that point that you bring up that there's not that many varieties of apples and like carrots. I can't even think of more than really one or two that you would buy at the grocery store. And kind of a follow-up question to that is how do you see some of the entrepreneurs in the space like kind of address the plant consumption and are there kind of like do you see evolving startups focusing on that on increasing that plant variety?
The answer is yes. There's a lot of innovation happening with this, and founders and startups tapping into a lot of diverse crops and other sources of food that I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
Jackfruit is, the one I think I focused on in that original blog post, and they're doing such a cool job of developing these, just really farmer friendly supply chains
Hmm.
and creating markets for something like jackfruit that didn't exist before.
Hmm.
And I'm just really inspired by what they're doing. And just, across the board, there are people tapping into all kinds of things. So I'm seeing a lot of folks, for example, looking at seaweed, looking at algae, looking
Wow.
at microalgae, looking at things like duckweed. There's protein in everything. It's just how do you grow it? How do you extract it? How do you formulate it?
Mm.
Mycelium is a really cool topic. That's you kind of the roots of mushrooms, essentially,
Okay.
which I think we'll see. Maybe I can add that to my trend list. I think we'll see more mycelium products in the next year or so. And also even just things, there's another cool company that's really looking to chickpeas and actually going back in time. So they've accessed a library of wild chickpeas, which are incredibly diverse in terms of their genetics, and they're able to kind of tap into certain characteristics within that genetic diversity of chickpeas from 1,000 years ago
Oh,
and
wow.
breed a better variety of chickpeas. So that's just a few of the things that I'm seeing that I think are really cool.
Oh, wow. I had no idea that about chickpeas. I love eating chickpeas. I find they actually keep your hunger satisfied and also taste very good too. Uh,
Same, same. I'm always adding chickpeas to everything.
yeah, and you said the mushroom, the mycelin, I think you said. Do you believe that that will be kind of a significant in the alternative proteins in making meat?
I think so. We talked a little bit about precision fermentation before, where you're using microbes to create another protein. And then there's sort of, this is a bad term for consumer facing products, but biomass fermentation. So, how are you growing those microbes and fungi on its own to be able to eat it? And fungi, mycelium grows really quickly and really efficiently, has a ton of protein, kind of has that fibrous texture that you want to see
Mhm.
in meat. And I think that it's going to be one of the next big things. It also, if you care about health and things like the ingredient label, there's a really great story that you can share around mycelium because it's a very simple product.
Oh, wow. That's very awesome to hear how like that's gonna transform or be the next big thing. And sort of one of my last questions for you is what advice or guidance do you have for students looking to start their career in the food innovation industry?
So, from a big picture perspective, I think it's important to be really curious, important to read a lot, important to talk to people, to network. An example from my own life is when I was looking to transition back into food,
Mhm.
I volunteered at the Cultivated Meat Symposium, which was this conference. And I think I told my other job that I was sick or something. And I spent all day working at this conference just because I wanted to be connected with folks in the industry. And just doing that was huge because I wasn't just another resume. I'd actually met some of these folks and had a bit more of a background. So I think being able to do things like that goes a really long way. In terms of food, technical skills can help if you're able to study food science. I mean, there's a whole range of disciplines that you can
Yeah.
study. Quick plug, GFI has something called the All Protein Project, where we're working with student groups around the world. So
Okay.
check that out if you're interested.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
yeah, please do. And just thinking through how can you combine technical and business knowledge, I think makes you really, really competitive. And then, just from a kind of more general perspective, not even just about food, I think especially when you're a student, you think you need to, you're going to graduate and then you're going to have this really big career and you're
Mm.
going to be the, CEO of everything. And I think it's important to keep in mind that careers take time, small experiences build into bigger experiences, and just really think about why you're doing what you're doing. And I think the two things to think about are think about your industry and then think about your specific role within that industry. And they're kind of similar, but two different things. You can be in food innovation, but if you hate what you're doing day to day, it doesn't really matter, even if you love the overall industry, or vice versa. You could have a role that you think is so cool in terms of your daily activities, but you're so bored by the industry. And so being able to kind of combine them is definitely an art form.
Mm.
And just know that your career will evolve and change over time, and just give yourself grace to let that unfold and give yourself time.
Yeah, thank you so much for that advice. I think it's so important to be patient as well as just starting off your career like myself. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I loved hearing about all the different transformations that are happening in the food innovation industry and what the Good Food Institute is doing. So thank you so much, Audrey, for coming on and join us at the table. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. This was really fun.